Anselm Cramen had a problem, and it wasn't just the smell of the Marduk delegate's breath, which was reminiscent of a landfill on fire. His real issue was the fact that Earth's fragile peace with these reptilian hotheads was hanging by a thread thinner than the hairline of a middle-aged Earthling denying his age. The orbital station, known as the Ring, wasn't exactly the jewel of humanity's architectural triumphs. More like a patchwork quilt of outdated metal and questionable engineering choices, hovering in the void above Earth with all the grace of a drunken ballerina. Inside, it was a carnival of chaos, filled with species from star systems both near and far, gathered for the prestigious and utterly ridiculous all-species orbital sports tournament. "You know, Cramen," slurred Virika, the Marduk diplomat, his words sloshing around like water in a bucket on a bumpy road, "your human games, they amuse us, like watching a three-legged dog trying to dance." Anselm forced a smile, the kind that would make a used car salesman proud. "Glad to provide entertainment value," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We aim to please." Around them the station thrummed with life, or something approximating it. The Marduk were clustered in their designated area, a riot of scales and spikes, looking like a convention of sadistic armadillos. Meanwhile, further down the hall, the Florins floated serenely, resembling oversized jellyfish, if jellyfish had a penchant for passive-aggressive commentary. "The problem," Anselm continued, wiping metaphorical sweat off his brow, "is that the Marduk delegation's idea of diplomacy involves more threats than a badly written ransom note." He adjusted his collar, which was doing its best to strangle him. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a rusty knife. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Anselm, trying to negotiate peace while simultaneously praying his next breath wouldn't be his last. The tournament itself was underway, a spectacle of intergalactic athletic prowess, if you could call it that. Imagine a group of aliens trying to play football, but the ball is a live grenadier, and you get the idea. The humans, though, had been surprisingly good at these games, much to the chagrin of everyone who'd bet against them, which was nearly everyone. Anselm's earpiece buzzed, delivering the dulcet tones of his assistant, Mira. "Anselm, you still alive? Or has Virika finally decided to make you the main course?" "Not yet," Anselm muttered, lowering his voice, "but there's still time." "Great. Just remember, don't mention the thing about their mothers. Marduk don't do yo mama jokes. Apparently they take family insults quite seriously." "Got it," Anselm replied, wishing he'd paid more attention during the cross-species etiquette seminar he'd slept through. "Yo mama's off the table." He turned his attention back to Virika, who was now examining a human sport on one of the myriad screens. It was soccer, or as the rest of the universe liked to call it, foot-to-body contact ball. The humans had made it to the finals, an unexpected twist that was about as welcome to the alien delegations as a space cockroach infestation. "You humans are resilient," Virika grumbled, sounding as if he'd just swallowed a porcupine. "Like the Zenithar beetle. Difficult to crush but satisfying when achieved." "Charming, as always," Anselm replied, his grin as sincere as a politician's promise. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Anselm turned, spotting a group of protesters, a mix of species waving banners that declared "sport not war" and "balls not bombs." Anselm couldn't help but admire their enthusiasm, if not their timing. "Looks like the Peace Brigade is on the move," Mira's voice crackled in his ear. "Think they'll succeed in annoying everyone to death?" "Perhaps," Anselm said, watching as the station's security, a ragtag group of disgruntled mercenaries and retired soldiers, attempted to herd the protesters away like cats misbehaving at a dog show. Virika was watching the scene unfold, his eyes narrowing. "Your people. So chaotic," he said, his voice oozing with disdain. Anselm shrugged. "We like to keep things interesting, keeps the blood pressure up." The Marduk delegate leaned closer, his breath now a toxic cocktail of whatever it is Marduk consumed for sustenance. "Remember, Cramen, this piece. It's fragile like the shell of a Gorthian egg. One wrong move and it all goes splat. Anselm nodded, his mind racing. In this environment, every word was a potential bomb, and with his track record, he'd likely be the idiot to trip over the tripwire. He looked back at Virika, the flickering light from the display casting shadows across the Marduk's reptilian features. "We both want peace," Anselm said, hoping sincerity would stick for once. "Even if it's just to avoid the paperwork that comes with war." Virika chuckled, a sound like gravel being pulverized. "Perhaps human, but remember, the Marduk don't negotiate kindly with those who play us for fools." "Noted," Anselm replied, the back of his mind working overtime to keep himself from saying something stupid. The conversation shifted back to the game, the humans on the field making a last-ditch effort to win, while their alien competitors did everything short of breaking the laws of physics to stop them. Anselm watched, heart pounding, not sure if he was more invested in the game or in keeping his head attached to his shoulders. As the game clock ticked down, the humans scored a last-second goal, the ball soaring past the alien goalkeeper with a precision that could only be described as miraculous. The human crowd erupted in cheers, which to the rest of the universe probably sounded more like the screeching of a dying star. Virika frowned, his scales bristling. "Impressive," he admitted reluctantly, his voice sour. "But remember, sport is not war." "True," Anselm agreed, his eyes on the human team celebrating like they'd just discovered chocolate for the first time. "But sometimes it's nice to win without anyone dying." The Marduk delegate nodded, a grim smile crossing his face. "Indeed." "Just remember, Crayman," he said with a tone as sharp as a Marduk blade, "victory in games doesn't guarantee peace." With that, Virika turned and left, his entourage following like obedient shadows. Anselm watched them go, a sense of relief washing over him, but it was temporary, like the calm before a solar storm. Mira's voice buzzed in his ear again. "Well, you survived. That's something. Want me to send the usual congratulations card to your mother?" "She can wait," Anselm said, breathing out a sigh that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for hours. "I have a feeling this isn't over yet." He glanced at the tournament floor, the human team basking in their short-lived triumph. Around them, the alien spectators were starting to disperse, like a cosmic tide receding. Anselm shook his head, already thinking of the next move. The stakes were higher than ever and nothing was certain, except maybe death, taxes, and the fact that intergalactic peace talks could turn on you faster than a hungry Marduk. As he turned to leave, Anselm couldn't help but mutter to himself, "Hope they remember we're playing for keeps. And that this isn't just another game." He made his way through the bustling chaos of the ring, feeling the weight of the task ahead. Peace, like the sport, was a game of inches, and Anselm Crayman was determined to make sure humanity came out on top, no matter how many alien toes he had to step on to get there. Anselm Crayman stood at the edge of the ring's observation deck, gazing out at the chaotic dance of ships docking and undocking. It reminded him of a scrapheap ballet, where every pirouette risked a collision, and the music was the clanging of metal. Or maybe it was more like a high-stakes game of bumper cars, but with fewer safety regulations and more potential for an explosive end. His earpiece crackled to life. "Anselm," Mira chirped, her voice tinged with the kind of excitement usually reserved for a sales clerk announcing a clearance sale. "The Marduk have arrived. And they're not exactly throwing a welcome parade." "Surprise, surprise," Anselm muttered, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What's the damage?" "They are demanding a meeting immediately." Something about honor and insults, but mostly it's just their usual shouting. Anselm sighed, the kind of weary exhalation that suggested he'd rather be sitting in a dentist's chair than facing another round of Marduk theatrics. "All right, let's get this circus on the road. Might as well see what new grievances they've cooked up." As he made his way through the bustling corridor, Anselm couldn't help but notice the interspecies tension thickening like a fog. The ring was a melting pot of languages, smells, and egos, especially egos. Every corner was filled with delegates gesticulating wildly, as if the universal language of diplomacy was interpretive dance. Anselm found Virika and his entourage in the main conference room, which was decorated with all the charm of a bureaucrat's waiting room, complete with flickering lights and chairs that tested your lumbar support. The Marduk delegate looked particularly prickly, his scales catching the harsh lighting like an oversized disco ball from hell. "Kramen," Virika growled, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Your human team. Their tactics are dishonorable." Anselm raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought we were playing by the rules. Though I admit the rules are more like suggestions at this point." The Marduk diplomat's eyes narrowed as if Anselm were a particularly juicy prey in a desert full of sand. "You humans think yourselves clever, but we've seen your moves, deception, subterfuge. It's unacceptable." "Well, Virika," Anselm said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace, "we're just adaptable. You know, like those little creatures that survive in lava pits. What are they called?" "Oh, right. Humans." Virika's entourage bristled, their scales rustling like a bad omen. The tension in the room was thick enough to spread on toast and call it breakfast. The kind of breakfast that came with a side of existential dread. "Your adaptability will not save you," Virika continued, his voice steady but laced with venom. "This mockery of a tournament is on the brink of collapse. One more slip and Earth will face consequences." Anselm kept his face neutral, though inside he was spinning faster than a politician caught on a hot mic. "We're just here for the sportsmanship," he said, oozing sincerity like a leaky faucet. "Wouldn't want to see things escalate over a few games, would we?" Virika snorted, a sound reminiscent of a clogged air duct. "Just remember, Kramen, we're watching closely." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Anselm replied, his tone as sweet as a Marduk's favorite poison. The meeting ended with all the warmth of a divorce settlement, and Anselm found himself back in the chaos of the ring. The human team was scheduled to face off against the Marduk later that day, which meant he had precious little time to prepare for the diplomatic equivalent of a slap fight. "Hey, Anselm," Mira's voice chirped in his ear again. "How'd it go with Virika?" "Oh, you know," Anselm replied, weaving through a crowd of Zorblaxian tourists who smelled faintly of burnt toast. "We exchanged pleasantries, threatened each other's planets, the usual. Great. So, do I need to start prepping the emergency escape pods?" "Not yet," Anselm said, though he made a mental note to check the escape routes just in case. "But keep them warm. Might be a long night." The tournament arena was buzzing with anticipation, a cacophony of alien chatter and the faint hum of malfunctioning lights. The humans were up against the Marduk, and the stakes were higher than a prom queen's heels. As Anselm watched from the sidelines, he couldn't help but feel like a circus ringmaster who'd lost control of the lions. The game commenced with the Marduk team charging forward, scales gleaming and expressions set in grim determination. The humans countered with their trademark blend of chaos and creativity, keeping the ball moving as if it were a live hand grenade. And knowing this tournament, it just might be. The crowd roared, a mix of cheers and jeers that blended into a symphony of intergalactic discord. Anselm couldn't help but smile. It was like watching a bar fight in zero gravity, unpredictable, violent, and strangely mesmerizing. "Humans are surprising everyone," Mira commented, her voice a welcome distraction in Anselm's ear. "They're playing like they've got nothing to lose. That's because most of them have student loans," Anselm quipped, watching as the human team scored a goal with a maneuver that defied several laws of physics and a few laws of common sense. Desperation is a hell of a motivator. The Marduk didn't seem to appreciate the human flair for rule bending. They regrouped, their strategy shifting from brute force to cunning. It was a move Anselm hadn't seen before, like a snake deciding it could fly just for the hell of it. As the game continued, the tension in the arena reached a fever pitch. The humans were holding their own, adapting to the Marduk's every move with a flexibility that bordered on reckless. Anselm felt a flicker of pride, quickly quashed by the reality of his precarious situation. "Don't breathe easy yet," Mira warned, a hint of concern in her usually sarcastic tone. "You know how these things can turn on a dime." "Yeah," Anselm replied, watching as the Marduk team launched a counterattack that sent the ball hurtling toward the human goal. "But if there's one thing we're good at, it's pulling victory from the jaws of impending doom." And they did. In a moment of sheer audacity, the human goalkeeper deflected the ball with a move that looked suspiciously like a dance step. The crowd erupted, a chorus of disbelief and grudging admiration from the Marduk supporters. Viraka, watching from his VIP box, wore an expression that could curdle milk. Anselm made a mental note to avoid crossing paths with him anytime soon, preferably forever. As the final whistle blew, the humans were declared the winners, their victory met with a mix of jubilation and muttered curses from the opposing teams. Anselm let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, feeling like he'd just dodged a bullet the size of a Marduk warship. "Congratulations," Mira said, her voice light and teasing. "Looks like you're not dead yet. Give it time," Anselm replied, watching as the human team celebrated with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners and prisoners granted parole. There's still plenty of room for disaster. The post-match chaos was a blur of handshakes, backslaps, and the occasional alien attempting to start a fistfight. Anselm navigated through it all with the grace of a man who knew he was in over his head but was determined to keep swimming anyway. As he exited the arena, Mira's voice crackled to life once more. "So, what's next on the agenda?" "Damage control," Anselm said, scanning the crowd for any sign of impending doom. "And maybe a drink. Or 5. "Well, if you're buying," Mira replied, "I'll make sure to clear my schedule." "Deal," Anselm said, allowing himself a rare moment of levity. "Just as long as you're ready to save my ass when the Marduk come knocking." "Always am," she said, her voice a steady presence in the chaos. "Just try not to make it too hard this time." As the echoes of the game faded into the background, Anselm felt the weight of the evening settling on his shoulders like an old coat that didn't quite fit. The peace with the Marduk was more fragile than ever, and the path ahead was as clear as mud. But for now, he'd take the win. A small victory in the grand scheme of things, but a victory nonetheless. And in a universe where the line between peace and war was as thin as a bureaucrat's patience, that was a win worth savoring, even if just for a moment. Anselm Cramen, diplomat, occasional sports enthusiast and reluctant hero, turned his gaze to the stars beyond the ring's windows. They were out there, a reminder of both the vastness of space and the smallness of his own insignificance. But as long as he was still in the game, he'd play his part, no matter how many alien toes he had to step on to do it. Anselm Cramen had found his way back to the observation deck, a place that offered an uninterrupted view of the chaos below. The view was what scientists called a panoramic disaster. Thousands of species mingled, each a different shade of impending doom. He had to admit, if he wasn't knee-deep in the middle of it, he'd probably have a laugh. But right now, he felt like an actor in a play where the director had forgotten to give him the script. The all-species Orbital sports tournament was in full swing, the kind of event that could ignite a war faster than you could say universal truce. Yet, somehow this fiasco had become Anselm's life. He watched as delegates and spectators buzzed around like bees in a hive, each with their own agenda, each a potential landmine waiting to blow. "Anselm," Mira's voice yet again danced in his ear like a mosquito that had discovered heavy metal. "Where are you hiding this time?" "I'm not hiding," Anselm replied, as a small explosion of cheering and booing erupted from below. "I'm observing." "Sure you are. Just remember, if you observe any more of Viraka's tantrums, I suggest ducking. Those scales, not just for show." Anselm chuckled, imagining Viraka's entourage flailing like fish out of water. The Marduk were nothing if not dramatic. "Noted. If they start flinging scales, I'm diving behind the nearest bureaucrat." The game continued in the arena below. The human team, freshly victorious, was now mingling with their Marduk counterparts, each side peppered with tension and the odd sportsmanlike handshake. Anselm squinted at the scene. If diplomacy could be boiled down to a sport, this was it, a mess of posturing and barely concealed threats masquerading as cooperation. "Anselm, you there?" Mira prodded again. "Yeah, just thinking about what a great spectator sport diplomacy could be. If only we could strangle each other with paperwork." "Sounds like a hit," Mira laughed. "Speaking of hits, you might want to get moving. Apparently, there's been some chatter about the Marduk being less than thrilled with their loss." "I'll bet." "Well, I suppose someone has to keep an eye on the peace," Anselm sighed. "And since I can't delegate that to someone else, I might as well head back." Moments later, Anselm found himself amidst the bustling crowd, blending like a cat in a dog park. He weaved through the throng, past delegates arguing fervently over rules that meant about as much as a wet paper towel in a hurricane. It was all a blur, a symphony of chaos, if one were generously inclined. "Anselm, up ahead," Mira's voice came with a touch of urgency. Before he had a chance to process the warning, the world tilted. Anselm stumbled, grasping for something solid as his vision swam. A sharp pain lanced through his side, hot, white, and all-consuming. He tried to steady himself, but his knees buckled, sending him crashing to the deck like a marionette whose strings had been severed. The noise around him faded into a distant hum, the colors of the arena blending into a kaleidoscope of meaningless motion. Anselm struggled to breathe, his mind a foggy mess as he registered the chaos erupting around him. Screams, shouts, a cacophony of alien tongues babbling in confusion. He caught a glimpse of Viraka's entourage, their faces a mixture of shock and something more sinister. The Marduk delegate himself appeared stunned, but Anselm couldn't shake the feeling that there was something in his eyes, a glint of satisfaction maybe. "Hang on, Anselm." Mira's voice was frantic now, but each word seemed to come from a great distance. "Help's on the way." It was funny, really. He'd always imagined his end might come at the hands of an irate diplomat or an alien misunderstanding. But here he was, bleeding out amidst the debris of a tournament intended for peace. The irony was not lost on him, even as his thoughts grew muddled and his vision dimmed. A shadow loomed over him, a figure that might have been human or possibly another Marduk. Anselm couldn't tell, nor did he particularly care. The world was slipping away from him, like sand through an hourglass, and he found the inevitability of it oddly comforting. As darkness closed in, his last coherent thought was a dry chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Space diplomacy was a killer in more ways than one. And then, nothing. The chaos on the ring was a sight to behold, like an intergalactic game of Clue gone horribly wrong. Delegates rushed to and fro, throwing accusations like confetti. Humans were shouting, Marduk were growling, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Mira was trying to find a thread of sanity. With Anselm incapacitated, let's call it that for now, the humans were scrambling. Accusations of foul play flew like oversized space pigeons, clumsily navigating the tumultuous air of distrust. Mira, however, was not easily swayed by the theatrics of it all. She knew Anselm and trusted his knack for getting into trouble more than anyone's claims of innocence. "Listen up, people," she shouted, her voice cutting through the clamor like a laser scalpel. "We need order here, or this entire place is going to implode faster than a politician's promises." A few heads turned, some human, some Marduk, and more than a few unrecognizable. The attention was fleeting, but it was enough. "This wasn't an accident," she continued, her voice steady as a ship through a meteor storm. "Somebody wanted Anselm out of the picture. And until we figure out who, no one's leaving." Typical human paranoia, a voice sneered from the Marduk contingent. "Always looking for someone else to blame." Mira locked eyes with the speaker, a Marduk with scales that gleamed like polished resentment. "If you want to point fingers, Marduk, do it somewhere else. We're trying to save a life here." The tension was thick enough to cut with a rusty blade, but Mira held her ground. She knew that the piece on the ring was hanging by a thread, and one more tug could unravel everything they'd worked for. But she also knew that giving in to panic was like inviting an asteroid for tea, never a good idea. As the delegates muttered among themselves like disgruntled bees, Mira's earpiece crackled to life. "Mira, it's chaos out here," a familiar voice said, exasperation clear. "You have to get control of this." "Working on it," Mira replied, scanning the room for any sign of cooperation. "But right now, we're dealing with a bunch of overgrown toddlers throwing tantrums." "Focus," the voice insisted. "We need to keep the humans and Marduk from each other's throats." "Tell me something I don't know," Mira muttered, rubbing her forehead as if she could massage away the impending migraine. She took a deep breath, then addressed the crowd with renewed determination. "Listen up," she shouted, her voice as sharp as a Marduk's claws. "We've got a bigger problem than just a disagreement over a game. Anselm is down, and if we don't work together, we're all going to be in a world of pain. So, let's put the blame game on hold and figure out what the hell is going on." There was a pause, a moment of suspended disbelief as the delegates exchanged wary glances. Mira could almost see the gears turning in their heads, the calculation of risk versus reward. It was a fragile piece, but one she intended to hold onto with both hands. "Fine," Virakas spoke up, his voice a low rumble. "We'll cooperate for now." Mira gave him a nod, more of a truce than an agreement. "Good, now let's get to work." As the delegates began to organize themselves, Mira allowed herself a moment of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in the world of interspecies diplomacy, a start was sometimes the best you could hope for. The medical team whisked Anselm away to the infirmary, their faces a study in grim determination. As they passed, Mira caught a glimpse of Anselm's pale, unconscious form, an uncomfortable reminder of how quickly things could change. She bit back a sigh and turned her attention back to the delegates. "We need to find out who did this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around her. "Because if we don't, this tournament is going to turn into a battlefield." The delegates murmured amongst themselves, doubt and suspicion hanging in the air like smog. But Mira knew that as long as they were focused on finding a solution, there was hope. A slim hope, but hope nonetheless. As the investigation began, the arena stood silent, an ominous backdrop to the unfolding drama. The scoreboard flickered, its lights casting eerie shadows across the now empty field. It was a stark reminder of the fragile peace they'd been tasked with maintaining, a peace that now seemed as distant as the stars themselves. Mira stood at the edge of the observation deck, her gaze fixed on the stars shimmering beyond the ring's windows. They were constant, unchanging, a reminder that the universe carried on regardless of the struggles of those who inhabited it. But she knew that even in the vastness of space, a single act could ripple outwards, setting events in motion that no one could predict. And as the delegates searched for answers, Mira resolved to see it through, to uncover the truth behind Anselm's fall. Because in a universe where trust was scarce and alliances were as fragile as glass, she knew that sometimes the only way forward was to keep fighting, even when the odds were stacked against you. One way or another, they'd find out who was responsible, and when they did, there'd be hell to pay. The tournament was living up to its reputation as a perfect storm of violence, and somewhere in the middle of it, Anselm was barely clinging to life like a particularly stubborn barnacle. Mira was left to pick up the pieces, and believe it or not, this wasn't her first time dealing with an intergalactic crisis on a tight schedule. But as she watched the mayhem unfold from the observation deck, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be the sort of fiasco that would earn her a permanent spot in the "Oh God, Why Me?" Hall of Fame. The ring, for its part, had adopted the ambience of a particularly rowdy pub on a Friday night, with the added complexity of alien languages and the occasional plasma weapon. Earth's team was scattered, trying to maintain some semblance of order. Forget keeping the Marduk from each other's throats, Mira would happily settle for keeping them off hers. "Mira, "We've got a problem," said Jax, one of her more tolerable colleagues, through her earpiece. "Only one problem. We must be ahead of schedule," she quipped, scanning the chaos below with a weary gaze. "Yeah, well, this one's a doozy," Jax continued, ignoring her snark. "We intercepted an encrypted message. It's definitely not the kind of friendly chat you'd have over coffee. Great. Because life isn't complicated enough," she muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. "What's it say?" "That's the fun part. It's in Marduk. And judging by the level of encryption, it's not someone sending their grocery list." Mira sighed, the kind of deep, soul-crushing sigh that could only come from dealing with Marduk politics. "All right, send it over. Let's add decoding to our list of impossible tasks for today." "On it," Jax replied, the line clicking off. Mira had to admit the Marduk had a talent for causing headaches. Whether it was their love of dramatic declarations or their penchant for turning any slight into a diplomatic incident, they were the gift that just kept on giving. And right now, she needed aspirin. A lot of aspirin, and maybe a stiff drink. She turned, finding herself face to face with Virika, who looked about as pleased to be there as Mira felt. His scales glinted menacingly, a reminder that even the universe's most annoying species could still be vaguely terrifying. "Mira," he rumbled, his eyes narrowing. "I hear there's been a development." "Yeah, you could say that," she replied, folding her arms. "Someone took a stab at Anselm. Literally, I might add, and we've got a mystery message in Marduk. Coincidence?" "I think not." Virika grunted, a sound that could have been agreement or indigestion. "We'll help decode it, but if this is some kind of setup—" "Oh, please, Virika, save the honor lecture for someone who cares," Mira interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Right now, we've got bigger fish to fry than who insulted whom." Virika's lips curled into something that might have been a smile or a grimace. It was hard to tell with Marduk. "Very well, but know this, human, we do not take threats lightly." "Neither do we," Mira shot back, her voice harder than she felt. "Now let's get to work before this place goes up in smoke." Virika nodded, a grudging respect in his eyes. He motioned for one of his techs, a younger Marduk with more enthusiasm than common sense, to start the decoding process. Mira watched them go, her mind already racing with possibilities. With any luck, the message would be the key to unraveling this whole tangled mess, or it would lead to another dead end. The latter seemed more likely, given her luck. As the tournament continued below, Earth's team was doing its best to keep up appearances. The matches were a blur of motion, each one more brutal than the last. Alien contestants clashed in a dizzying display of strength, agility, and occasionally outright cheating. It was a spectacle, albeit one more akin to a bar fight than a sporting event. "Nice move if you're into that whole attempted murder thing," Mira muttered, watching one particularly aggressive player knock his opponent senseless with a swift kick to the head. "Hey, if you can't win, disqualify the competition." Jax's voice came back through the earpiece, dripping with sarcasm. "Good point," she replied, her eyes fixed on the scoreboard. "But right now, we need to focus on decoding that message." "Any luck working on it?" Jax assured her. "Virika's techs are making progress. Turns out having claws doesn't mean you can't type." "Great," Mira sighed. "Keep me posted, and try not to let anyone kill each other while you're at it." "Will do," Jax replied before the line went dead once more. Mira glanced at the scoreboard again, the bright lights casting a harsh glow over the arena. Earth's team was holding its own for the moment, but the real battle was happening behind the scenes. She had a sinking feeling that the encrypted message was only the tip of the iceberg, and if they didn't crack it soon, the whole tournament might come crashing down around them. As she watched the players below, a sudden commotion drew her attention. A scuffle had broken out on the field, a knot of players grappling with one another in a tangle of limbs. The referees were quick to intervene, but the damage was done. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of boos, cheers, and something that might have been a collective groan of despair. Mira shook her head, a sardonic smile tugging at her lips. "Just another day at the office," she muttered to herself, turning away from the chaos below. She had bigger problems to worry about than a simple brawl. The encrypted message was still waiting to be decrypted, and with any luck, it would offer some much-needed clarity. But until then, all she could do was keep her head down and hope for the best. Back in the temporary command center, a converted storage room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation, Mira found Jax hunched over a console, tapping furiously at the keys. Virikaz's techs were gathered around another terminal, their expressions a mix of concentration and mild frustration. "Any luck?" Mira asked, leaning against the wall. "Some," Jax replied without looking up. "We've managed to decrypt part of it. It's interesting." "Interesting how? Like a car crash or a UFO sighting?" Mira asked dryly. "A bit of both," he admitted, finally glancing up. "It's definitely Marduk and it's definitely not good." "Fantastic," Mira said with a cheerfulness that could have cut glass. "Care to share?" Jax shrugged, nodding to the screen. "It's a list of targets. And Anselm's name is on it." "Lovely," Mira muttered. "Because what's a tournament without a hit list? Any idea who sent it?" "Not yet," Jax admitted. "But we're working on it." "Work faster," Mira urged, her mind racing. "We don't have much time. If Anselm's on that list, we need to find out who's behind it and why." "Believe me, we're trying," Jax assured her. "But this isn't just any encryption. It's military grade. Whoever sent this knew what they were doing." "Great," Mira muttered again. "Because we needed one more complication." As Jax and the techs continued their work, Mira paced the room, her thoughts a tangled mess of possibilities and dead ends. The Marduk might have been involved. Hell, they probably were. But there was something about the whole situation that didn't sit right with her. Someone wanted Anselm out of the picture, and they were willing to go to great lengths to make it happen. But why? The answer eluded her, slipping through her fingers like sand. But she was determined to find it no matter what. An insistent beat pulled her from her thoughts, and she turned to see Jax staring at the screen with a mix of triumph and disbelief. "We did it," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "We cracked the message, and you're not going to like it." "I like very few things these days," Mira replied. "Hit me with it." Jax hesitated, then tapped a few keys. The message appeared on the screen, the words stark and unyielding. "It's a conspiracy," he said, his voice low. "Someone's trying to start a war." Mira felt the world tilt beneath her feet, her mind racing as she processed the implications. A war. An interspecies war, and Anselm had been caught in the middle of it. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know yet," Jax admitted, "but we're close. We just need a little more time." "Time we might not have," Mira replied, her voice hardening. "We need to stop this before it's too late." Jax nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Agreed. But we're going to need help." Mira nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. They'd need to gather allies, find out who was behind the conspiracy, and put a stop to it before the entire tournament, and possibly the universe, went to hell in a handbasket. It wasn't going to be easy, but then again, nothing worth doing ever was. And if there was one thing Mira knew how to do, it was fight. Even when the odds were stacked against her, especially then. "Let's get to work," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "We've got a war to stop." As the team began to mobilize, Mira allowed herself a small, grim smile. In a universe where trust was scarce and betrayal was a common currency, she knew that the only way to win was to keep fighting, no matter the cost. Because sometimes the universe didn't give you a choice. Sometimes all you could do was stand and fight, and hope that somehow, someway, you'd make it out the other side in one piece. As the chaos of the tournament continued on the ring, Mira steeled herself for the battle ahead. With any luck, they'd piece together the conspiracy and stop the war before it began. But if not, they'd go down swinging. After all, in the end, it was the only thing they could do. The air in the command center was thick with tension, or was it just the smell of desperation? Mira wasn't sure. Either way, it was a choking atmosphere, and she was right in the middle of it. Virikaz's techs were still at it, clacking away at their consoles like their lives depended on it. Maybe they did. After all, the universe had a nasty habit of being unkind to the slow. Jax was pacing like a caged animal, his fingers twitching as if yearning to strangle someone, or maybe something. Probably the universe. Anything, Mira asked, not really expecting a miracle but too stubborn to not ask. Yeah, a new headache, Jax replied, his sarcasm cutting through the room like a plasma blade through butter. Seems like someone decided to implicate Earth in this little conspiracy. As if we didn't have enough on our plate. Fantastic. Just when I thought today couldn't get any shittier, Mira said, her voice dry enough to evaporate a small ocean. Virika, looming in the corner like a scaly harbinger of bad news, grunted, a sound that could mean anything from I agree to I'm going to eat you. It was hard to tell with the Marduk. We're being set up, Mira continued, her mind racing. Someone's trying to isolate us, make us look like the bad guys. Mission accomplished on that front, Jax said. The other teams are already giving us the stink eye, even the ones without actual eyes. Mira groaned inwardly. It was bad enough they were dealing with an interspecies conspiracy, but now they had to handle interspecies diplomacy too. Great. Just great. Any bright ideas, genius? Mira asked, shooting Jax a sideways glance. Well, we could always blow the whole place up and make a run for it, Jax replied, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. But that might strain diplomatic relations a tad. You're a laugh riot, you know that, Mira muttered, though she couldn't help but smirk. Humor was as much a shield as it was a weapon, and they needed all the defense they could get. Okay, let's think, Mira said, her voice taking on a steel edge. If we're going to get out of this, we need allies. People who haven't already written us off as the villains of this melodrama. We could try reasoning with them, Jack suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't hold out much hope for that approach. You know, talk it out over drinks and pretend we're all friends. Yeah, because that always works so well, Mira shot back. But it's a start, I guess. We just need to find someone who doesn't want to skin us alive. Virakash shifted, his presence as comforting as a hangman's noose. Mira wasn't entirely sure where he stood in this mess, but for now, he wasn't trying to rip their heads off. That counted as a win in her book. She turned to him, raising an eyebrow. You going to back us up or just stand there looking terrifying? Virakaz's lips curled in what might charitably be called a smile. The Marduk do not act rashly. We require evidence. Of course you do, Mira sighed. Because that's exactly what we don't have. Jax shook his head, his frustration palpable. We need to get Anselm back in the game too. If he's on that hit list, he's a sitting duck. More like a sitting dove, Mira corrected. Which is basically a duck wearing a tuxedo. Still a target. True, Jax agreed. But if we can clear Earth's name, maybe we can keep him alive long enough to finish the tournament. Right? Mira said, her mind whirring with possibilities. Let's split up. Jax, you keep digging. We need to find out who's pulling the strings here. Viraka, if you could refrain from killing us in the meantime, that'd be swell. Viraka nodded, a gesture heavy with unspoken words. The Marduk will watch and wait. Of course you will, Mira said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in her voice. Nothing like a bit of passive aggressiveness to brighten the day. With that, she turned on her heel and strode out of the room, Jax following closely behind. The corridors of the ring seemed to close in around them, each turn promising more trouble and less hope. But if they were going to survive this and keep their planet from being implicated in a galactic clusterfuck, they had to act fast. As they walked, Mira tried to ignore the lingering glances and whispered conversations that followed them. The other teams were already on edge, and the last thing she needed was for a rumor to spark interspecies violence. Any chance we can talk our way out of this? Jax asked, his tone suggesting he knew the answer already. Mira shook her head. Not likely. We need proof, something solid. Otherwise, people will just see what they want to see. So we're screwed either way, Jax muttered. Pretty much, Mira agreed, her voice resigned. But we've been screwed before and come out okay. Yeah, but this time it's not just our asses on the line, Jax pointed out. It's Earth. And you know the whole interspecies peace thing. Details, Mira said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Let's focus on surviving right now. We'll worry about the peace treaty later. They made their way to the observation deck, a sprawling space overlooking the chaos below. The tournament continued unabated, a blur of violence and raw competition that seemed almost trivial in light of everything else. "Look at them," Jax said, gesturing to the crowd. "Blissfully ignorant, or just blissfully violent," Mira said. "Either way, they're not our problem right now." A sudden commotion drew their attention, and Mira felt her stomach sink as she saw Anselm on the field, barely clinging to life. He dodged and weaved with the desperation of a man who knew he was outmatched, his eyes wide with fear and determination. "He looks like he's about to have a very bad day," Jax observed. "Join the club," Mira replied, her voice tight. "We need to help him. And how do you propose we do that?" Jax asked, skepticism coloring his words. Mira considered her options. There weren't many, and most of them ended in disaster. But then again, so did doing nothing. "We need a distraction," she decided, her mind racing. "Something big enough to draw attention away from him." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You planning to juggle plasma grenades or something?" "Something like that," Mira said, a plan forming in her mind. "Come on, let's see if we can't cause a little chaos ourselves." Together, they made their way to the edge of the observation deck, scanning the area for anything that might help. The place was a labyrinth of tech and machinery, all seemingly designed to make life on the ring marginally less unbearable. Or perhaps just different flavors of unbearable. "There," Mira said, pointing to a control panel embedded in the wall. "If we can tap into that, we might be able to cause a temporary blackout." Jax frowned. "And how exactly do you plan to do that without alerting everyone to the fact that we're about to break several intergalactic laws?" "With style," Mira replied, flashing what she hoped was a reassuring grin. "And maybe a little luck." Jax rolled his eyes but moved to the panel, his fingers flying over the keys with practiced ease. Mira kept watch, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned the crowd for any sign of trouble. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like a lifetime. "Okay," Jax said, his voice low. "I think I've got it. But this is going to be messy." "Messy's our middle name," Mira said, her eyes never leaving the field. "Do it." With a final keystroke, Jax triggered the blackout. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the arena into sudden darkness. Shouts of surprise and confusion erupted from the crowd, the sound a chaotic symphony that filled the air. "Now's our chance," Mira said, her voice urgent. "Let's move." Together they slipped away from the observation deck, moving through the shadows with practiced stealth. The chaos of the blackout provided the perfect cover, allowing them to reach the edge of the field without drawing attention. "Anselm," Mira called, her voice cutting through the din. He turned toward her, relief washing over his face as he recognized them. "Mira, Jax." "What the hell's going on?" "No time to explain," Jax said, grabbing Anselm's arm. "We need to get you out of here." "But the match?" "Screw the match," Mira interrupted. "There's a hit out on you, and we're not sticking around to see if they succeed." Anselm hesitated, his gaze darting between them and the ongoing chaos. But the urgency in their voices must have convinced him, because he nodded and fell into step beside them. They moved quickly, weaving through the throng of confused spectators and bewildered aliens. The darkness was both friend and foe, hiding them from prying eyes while also obscuring their path. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that every second counted. Behind them, the lights flickered back to life, illuminating the arena in harsh clarity. Shouts and accusations filled the air as the crowd tried to make sense of the disruption. But by then, they were already slipping into a side corridor, leaving the chaos behind them. "That was close," Anselm said, his voice breathless. "Too close," Jax agreed. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Mira nodded, her mind still racing. They'd bought themselves some time, but it wouldn't last. Whoever was behind this conspiracy wouldn't stop until their plans came to fruition, or until they were stopped. "We need to regroup," she said, her voice firm. "Find a safe place to lay low and figure out our next move." "And what if there isn't a safe place?" Anselm asked, a hint of fear in his eyes. "Then we make one," Mira replied, determination hardening her voice. "We're not giving up, not now, not ever." They pressed on, the weight of the galaxy's troubles heavy on their shoulders. But they were human, damn it, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against the odds. And maybe, just maybe, getting the last laugh. Because in the end, that was all that mattered. The command center was a place where chaos and order danced an endless tango, and Mira was the one trying to keep them in step. She leaned over a console, squinting at lines of Marduk code that squiggled across the screen like a drunken snake. It was like trying to decipher ancient runes with a hangover, each symbol a reminder of how underprepared they were for this interstellar mess. "How's it looking?" Jax's voice crackled in her earpiece, sounding about as cheerful as a Marduk funeral. "Like a Marduk poetry contest," Mira replied. "Full of metaphors that make no sense and probably involve a lot of death." Jax snorted. "Sounds like my kind of party." Mira brushed a stray hair from her face, ignoring the steady hum of machinery around her. The command center was all harsh light and colder than a Marduk's bedside manner. Every beep and click was a reminder that time was ticking away faster than they could keep up. "I'm starting to think the universe just hates us," Mira muttered, eyes scanning the gibberish. "Every time we think we're getting ahead, it throws another curveball." "Could be worse," Jax said, his sarcasm a welcome distraction. "We could be back on Earth dealing with budget cuts and political nonsense." Mira chuckled despite herself. "I'd take that over a possible intergalactic incident any day. At least politicians don't usually come with plasma rifles." "Usually," Jax echoed with a knowing laugh. "There," Mira said, her finger stabbing at the screen. "I think I found something. Looks like a sequence disguised as a standard Marduk encryption." Jax was quiet for a moment. "You think it's the big red button that blows us all to hell? Wouldn't that be a fun twist?" Mira replied dryly, already working to decode the sequence. "No, it looks more like a failsafe, but it's tied to the main reactor controls. Enough to disrupt the ring's stability. So they plan to sabotage the entire orbital ring," Jax said, his voice thoughtful. "That's ambitious even for them." "Ambitious or stupid," Mira countered. "Depending on how you look at it." A pause stretched between them, thick with unspoken fears. The Marduk weren't known for subtlety, but this was another level of insanity. If Earth was framed for this, the fallout would be catastrophic. "How do we use this?" Jax asked, breaking the silence. "We can't exactly announce it over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly stop trying to kill each other while we figure this out." "No," Mira agreed, a plan slowly taking shape in her mind. "But we can use it to our advantage. Turn their own game against them." "Sounds risky," Jax said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I like it." "Good," Mira said, her eyes lighting up with determination. "Because we're going all in." The tournament's final match was approaching, a spectacle everyone would be watching. It was their best chance to expose the conspiracy and clear Earth's name, but that also meant one hell of a gamble. If they failed, they'd be the laughingstock of the galaxy, assuming they survived long enough to hear the punchline. "Okay, here's the plan," Mira started, pulling up a holographic display. "We're going to need Virikal on this. His presence will keep the Marduk off balance. They respect him too much to act rashly." "And what about Anselm?" Jax asked, already knowing the answer. "He's our wild card," Mira said, her voice firm. "If we can get him to the main reactor controls during the match, we can override the sabotage sequence. But we'll need a distraction, something big." "Like a blackout," Jax suggested, a grin in his voice. "Exactly," Mira said. "We'll use the chaos to slip Anselm into position. Once he's there, he can shut down the sequence and we'll broadcast the evidence." "And if he doesn't make it?" Jax asked, reminding them both of the stakes. "Then we're royally screwed," Mira admitted. "But we don't have a choice. It's this or nothing." "All right," Jax said. "Let's round up our ragtag crew and get this show on the road." With the plan set, Mira felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. It was the kind of calm that came before a storm, the acceptance that the next few hours would be pivotal in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But if they pulled this off, they'd save Earth, and maybe even earn a little respect in the process. They regrouped in a dimly lit corridor, the low hum of the ring a constant background. Anselm was there, still looking like someone who'd just barely dodged a plasma blast. He wore the expression of a man who knew he was living on borrowed time but refused to give it back. "Nice of you to join us," Jax quipped, slapping Anselm on the back. "Ready to be a hero, more like a sacrificial lamb," Anselm replied, his voice dry. "But sure, let's call it heroism." Viracast stood nearby, his imposing form casting a shadow over the group. His scales glinted in the low light, a reminder of just how deadly he could be if things went sideways. For now, though, he seemed content to play the part of silent guardian. "Mira has a plan," Jax said, his tone suggesting that this was both a blessing and a curse. "It's a good plan," Mira added, ignoring the skepticism in his voice. "If we can pull this off, we'll not only save our skins but also prove Earth's innocence." "Ambitious," Viracast rumbled, his voice as deep as a Marduk chasm, "but achievable." "We'll see," Mira said, glancing around at her assembled allies. "Here's what we're going to do." As they laid out the strategy, Mira watched their faces, looking for the telltale signs of doubt or fear. But what she saw instead was resolve, a determination born from desperation. They were a motley crew, unlikely allies in an even unlikelier situation, yet she wouldn't trade them for anything. With the plan set and roles assigned, they dispersed into the shadows, each with their own part to play. The weight of the galaxy seemed to press down on them, but Mira pushed it aside. There was no room for doubt, not now. They had a mission to complete and a planet to save. The final match was underway, a chaotic blend of violence and spectacle that would have put any Earth sport to shame. The crowd was a roaring beast, every cheer and shout a reminder of the stakes. Mira watched from her vantage point, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. "Everyone in position?" Mira asked, her voice steady. "Ready and waiting," Jax replied, somewhere in the maze of the ring's underbelly. "Anselm?" Mira prompted. "Here," came the reply, shaky but determined. "Wish me luck." "Luck's for the unprepared," Mira said, the old adage rolling off her tongue. "You've got skill, and that's better." In the arena below, the match raged on, a blur of movement and noise. Mira could barely make out individual shapes, the competitors a mass of limbs and fury. But that was good. It meant the audience was focused elsewhere, giving them the cover they needed. "Jax, hit it," Mira ordered, her eyes fixed on the chaos below. A moment later, the lights flickered, then died, plunging the ring into a familiar darkness. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, confusion and fear spreading like wildfire. It was the same trick they'd used before, but this time the stakes were much higher. "Go, Anselm," Mira urged, her voice a lifeline in the void. With the arena plunged into darkness, Anselm moved through the shadows, each step a leap of faith. He knew the stakes, and failure wasn't an option, not with so much on the line. He reached the control panel, sweat beading on his brow as he set to work. The Marduk code was a tangled web of symbols and sequences, each one a potential trap, but he'd practiced, prepared for this moment as best he could. "Almost there," Anselm muttered, his fingers dancing over the keys. "Just a little more." The lights returned, the arena awash in sudden clarity. Anselm felt his heart leap into his throat, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not now, not when they were so close. "Mira," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's done. I've got it." A cheer erupted from the crowd, a sound so loud it seemed to shake the ring itself. But Mira barely heard it, too focused on the task at hand. The evidence was ready, and it was time to show the galaxy the truth. "Broadcast it," Mira said, her voice filled with grim satisfaction. "Let them see what really happened." Jax activated the feed, sending the decoded information streaming into the ether. It was a risk, broadcasting without knowing who might intercept it, but they were out of options. Sometimes you had to gamble everything just to stay in the game. As the data flowed out, Mira could only hope it would reach the right eyes. That someone somewhere would see the truth and understand the stakes. They'd done all they could, and now it was out of their hands. "Now we wait," Mira said, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and tension. "And pray," Jax added, though his tone suggested he wasn't holding his breath for divine intervention. In the silence that followed, they were left with nothing but their thoughts and the knowledge that, for better or worse, they'd played their part. The rest was up to fate, and fate was about as predictable as a Marduk in a china shop. "Think it'll work?" Anselm asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Mira shrugged, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Who knows, but at least we tried." "And if it doesn't?" Anselm pressed, a note of fear in his voice. "Then we improvise," Mira said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "And hope we're better at it than we think." The future was uncertain, as always, but for the first time in a long time, Mira felt a glimmer of hope. It was fragile and fleeting, but it was enough to keep them going. Enough to remind them why they fought, why they risked everything for a chance at something better. Because in a universe that seemed determined to grind them down, sometimes the only choice was to stand up, grit your teeth, and laugh in its face. The all-species Orbital sports tournament swirled around the arena like a cosmic tornado of violence, each moment threatening to rip the fragile piece to shreds. Mira knew they were playing with fire, but if Earth was to avoid becoming the proverbial toasted marshmallow, the gamble had to pay off. The arena was alive with the kind of energy that only came from watching beings from across the galaxy beat the living daylights out of each other. The sight was almost poetic in its barbarity, but Mira didn't have the luxury to appreciate the artful carnage. She was too busy keeping her eyes peeled for the repercussions of their little stunt. "Looks like the lights are back on," Jax remarked through the earpiece, his voice crackling in Mira's ear. "I was just getting used to the dark. It really brought out the ambience of impending doom." "Focus, Jax," Mira snapped, her patience thinner than a holographic postcard. "We've got a bigger show to run." Jax chuckled, the sound as dry as a Marduk desert. "Right, because nothing says showstopper like potentially sparking an interstellar war." Below, the sport was reaching its chaotic crescendo. Earth's team, underdogs by every possible metric, was holding its own against the odds. It was less about skill and more about sheer tenacity, a classic human trait that tended to annoy the hell out of everyone else. "Anselm, status report," Mira barked, still watching the Marduk positions with an eagle eye. If they made a move, she needed to know before it happened. "Still here, still breathing," Anselm replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Managed to get the reactor controls under lock." "They won't know what hit them." "Perfect," Mira said, gritting her teeth. "Just keep it that way." In the command center, the atmosphere was a cocktail of nerves and bravado. Mira's team worked furiously, fingers flying over consoles as they monitored every blip of data from the ring. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was rising to the occasion with a middle finger raised to the universe. "Virika, you seeing this?" Mira asked, switching channels. The Marduk diplomat turned reluctant ally was their ace in the hole, or so she hoped. "Yes," came the deep rumble of Virika's voice. "Interesting strategy. Humans are unpredictable." "Unpredictable is just a nice way of saying we have no idea what the hell we're doing," Jax interjected, unable to resist. "Quite," Virika agreed, his tone almost amused. The match reached its climax, tensions in the arena tighter than a noose. Earth's team was on the offensive, their tactics a mix of desperation and innovation. Mira could practically hear the Marduk's collective scales rattling from the observation deck. "Jax, I need that distraction now," Mira ordered, knowing full well the consequences of failure. "Make it big, make it loud." "On it," Jax replied, his voice a mixture of excitement and dread. "Hope everyone loves fireworks." An instant later, the arena was rocked by a cacophony of sound and light as part of the ring's exterior erupted in a carefully orchestrated display. It drew every eye, every mind, and every weapon away from the real action. The explosion was a brilliant cosmic illusion, a sleight of hand performed on a galactic scale. "Go, Anselm," Mira urged, adrenaline spiking her voice. "Now's your chance." Anselm moved like a man possessed, diving through the chaos with the urgency of someone being chased by death itself. He reached the main reactor controls, fingers dancing over the keys with a precision born of necessity. "I'm in," Anselm breathed, locking down the systems with shaking hands. "Marduk code is disabled." "Override complete, yes," Mira shouted, though she tempered her excitement with the knowledge that they weren't out of the woods yet. "Broadcast the evidence, Jax. Done and done," Jax confirmed, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Let's see how the galaxy likes our little newsreel." The evidence shot across the galaxy's networks, a data packet designed to slam into the collective consciousness like a comet. It laid bare the Marduk's machinations, their plot to frame Earth for sabotage unraveling like a poorly knit sweater. The arena was a tempest of confusion, anger, and disbelief. Marduk delegates, their scales flaring with indignation, were forced to reckon with the reality of their exposed duplicity. For once, their bluster and bravado fell short, their honor tainted by their own schemes. "Looks like we've got their attention," Virika observed, his tone as dry as the Marduk homeworld. And their outrage, Mira allowed herself a moment of vindictive satisfaction. "Good. Let them choke on it." Earth's team, galvanized by the unfolding drama, pushed harder, their final plays driven by a need to not just survive but to win. And when they did, against all odds, against every expectation. The roar of triumph was a sound Mira would carry with her for years, a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, the little guy didn't get squashed. "We did it," Anselm said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We actually did it." "Damn right we did," Mira replied, her voice fierce with the fire of victory. Never underestimate the power of crazy humans. As the tournament concluded, the Marduk were left with no choice but to concede, their defeat as much a political blow as a sporting one. Earth's reputation, once teetering on the brink, was saved by the thinnest of margins. "So, what now?" Jax asked, joining Mira in the command center as the dust settled. "Do we get medals or just a pat on the back? How about neither?" Mira replied, her smile wry and weary. "We settle for not being blown up. Call it a win." The aftermath was a whirlwind of political maneuvering, threats, and reluctant apologies. Mira navigated the minefield with the skill of someone who'd spent too long in the trenches, each step calculated and cautious. Virika, true to his word, stood by them, his presence a silent endorsement that held the Marduk in check. It was an uneasy peace, but in a universe as unforgiving as theirs, uneasy was about as good as it got. "Well, that's that," Anselm said, finally relaxing for what felt like the first time in years. "Think we'll get a breather now, or are we due for another round of cosmic punishment?" Mira laughed, a sound full of exhaustion and relief. "Who knows? But if the universe wants a fight, we'll give it one. We've gotten pretty good at it." Jax nodded, his grin as irreverent as ever. "Yeah, we've got a knack for punching above our weight and living to tell the tale." As they prepared to leave the ring, the team felt a sense of camaraderie forged in the fires of chaos and conflict. They'd faced the abyss and refused to blink, and that was something to be proud of. "Guess this is goodbye," Virika said, his massive frame looming like a mountain over the group. "Until next time," Mira replied, offering a genuine smile. "Try to stay out of trouble, or at least don't start any without us." The Marduk's laugh was a deep, rumbling thing, an unexpected sound from a creature built for intimidation. "I shall endeavor to maintain peace. But should trouble arise, I will remember the humans who defied the odds." With that, they parted ways, each returning to their respective worlds, their respective battles. The universe was still a dangerous, unpredictable place, but for now they had won a small victory, a reminder that no matter how dark things got, there was always a light to be found, even if it was just the glint of a sarcastic smile. "Well, back to the grind?" Anselm asked as they boarded their ship, the familiar hum of the engines a comforting sound. "Yep," Mira said, settling into her seat. "But at least we've got a hell of a story to tell, and if anyone doubts us, we can just show them the charred remains of our dignity," Jax added, his tone as sardonic as ever. As they left the ring behind, Mira took a moment to reflect on everything they'd accomplished. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was theirs. They'd managed to pull a victory from the jaws of defeat, and in the end, that was enough. For now, anyway. Here's to the next adventure, Mira said, raising an imaginary glass. To adventure, Anselm and Jax echoed, their voices filled with the promise of whatever came next. In a universe that never stopped spinning, they'd learned to roll with the punches and keep their feet. Because sometimes, just surviving was the biggest victory of all. The aftermath of the tournament was as chaotic as a drunken brawl in zero gravity. Earth's team had pulled off the unthinkable, and now their unexpected victory was the talk of the galaxy. Or at least, it was as soon as the dust settled, and everyone realized they hadn't just witnessed the start of an interstellar war. Mira stood in the command center, surveying the scene with the satisfaction of someone who just defused a ticking bomb with seconds to spare. Anselm and Jax joined her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and triumph. "Did we really just do that?" Anselm asked, still looking like he just won the galaxy's worst game of cosmic roulette. "Yep," Jax replied, his grin as wide as a nebula. "And we didn't even need a miracle. Just a lot of luck and a propensity for reckless idiocy," Mira added, leaning back against the console. "What now?" Anselm asked, glancing around as if expecting another crisis to materialize out of thin air. "We're not exactly in the clear yet, are we?" Mira shook her head. "Not by a long shot, but we've bought ourselves some breathing room. And more importantly, we've shown the galaxy that Earth isn't just some backwater planet ripe for the picking." Virikaz's imposing form appeared on the observation deck, his scales catching the light as he approached. "Your victory has made waves, Mira. The Marduk are displeased. Jax snorted. "I'd say they're spitting mad," quite, Virikaz replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. Mira crossed her arms, considering their next move. The peace talks, derailed by the Marduk schemes, needed to get back on track. But first they had to deal with the fallout from their little spectacle. "So what's the verdict?" she asked Virikaz. "Are we going to be persona non grata after this?" "The Marduk are not known for their forgiveness," Virikaz said. "However, your actions have forced their hand. They will have to negotiate in good faith, or risk losing face." "Losing face," Jax mused. "Sounds like a fate worse than death for them. In Marduk politics it is," Virikaz confirmed. "Great," Anselm said, sarcasm oozing from his words. "So, we've gone from being potential scapegoats to reluctant heroes. Welcome to the wonderful world of interstellar diplomacy," Mira said dryly. "Where the stakes are high and the players are all pricks." Their victory was more than just a win on the field. It was a statement. Earth wasn't going to be pushed around, not by the Marduk, not by anyone. It was a bold move, one that would put them in the galactic spotlight for both praise and scrutiny. But if nothing else, humanity was nothing if not adaptable. "Well, I guess the good news is that we're famous now," Jax said, his tone as irreverent as ever. "Infamous, more like," Mira corrected. "But hey, if it keeps the peace talks alive, I'll take it." Back on the ring, the atmosphere shifted from one of tense anticipation to reluctant celebration. Earth's team was hailed as the underdogs who triumphed against all odds, a story that the rest of the universe couldn't help but admire, even if it pissed off the Marduk. As Earth's representatives, Mira and her team found themselves the reluctant stars of the show. They were feted, congratulated, and occasionally glared at by Marduk delegates still nursing their bruised egos. One such delegate, a Marduk with scales that glimmered like polished steel, approached them during the post-match reception. "Your victory was unexpected," he said, his voice cold enough to cause frostbite. "Unexpected but deserved," Mira replied, matching his cool demeanor with her own brand of steely resolve. The Marduk inclined his head slightly, a gesture Mira chose to interpret as grudging respect. "Perhaps. We will see if your tenacity holds in the negotiations." Mira smiled, though it held as much warmth as a Marduk blizzard. We've got plenty more where that came from. As the delegate walked away, Jax leaned in, whispering conspiratorially. Think they'll ever get used to us? Doubtful, Mira said. But they'll have to learn to live with it. The peace talks resumed with renewed vigor, the Marduk now forced to engage in genuine negotiation rather than thinly veiled threats. Earth's position, once precarious, was now fortified by their unexpected triumph and the undeniable fact that their resilience was not to be underestimated. In the days that followed, Mira and her team worked tirelessly to secure the terms that would ensure Earth's place in the galactic community. Viracab proved to be an invaluable ally, his knowledge of Marduk customs and politics instrumental in navigating the labyrinthine process. Remind me why we're doing this again, Anselm asked during one particularly grueling session, his eyes glazed over from the endless discussions. Because we like living, Jax replied, stifling a yawn, and peace is generally more conducive to that than getting vaporized. Fair point, Anselm conceded. Despite the challenges, they made progress. Slowly but surely, they hammered out agreements that would maintain peace between Earth and the Marduk, ensuring that future conflicts would be fought with words rather than weapons. We might actually pull this off, Mira said one evening, her voice laced with cautious optimism. Don't jinx it, Anselm warned. The universe loves nothing more than to dash our hopes. True, Jax agreed. But for now, we can at least enjoy the moment. And enjoy it they did. As Earth's delegation, they found themselves the center of attention, a role they embraced with a mix of pride and disbelief. The galaxy watched, intrigued by the humans who had defied expectations and refused to be cowed by the Marduk's bluster. As the days turned into weeks, the peace talks finally reached a conclusion. A treaty was signed, one that would ensure Earth's safety and secure its place among the stars. It was a momentous occasion, a turning point that would resonate for years to come. We did it, Mira said, her voice filled with a sense of accomplishment. We actually did it. Against all odds, Anselm added, shaking his head in disbelief. Who would have thought us? Jax said with a grin. We thought. Their triumph was celebrated across the galaxy, their story becoming a symbol of resilience and determination. Earth, once seen as a minor player, was now recognized as a force to be reckoned with, their ingenuity and adaptability earning them respect and admiration. As they prepared to leave the ring and return to Earth, Mira took a moment to reflect on everything they'd accomplished. It hadn't been easy, and there were plenty of moments when it seemed like they were teetering on the edge of disaster. But they'd persevered, and in the end they'd emerged victorious. Well, back to reality, Anselm asked as they boarded their ship, the familiar hum of the engines filling the air. Yeah, Mira replied, settling into her seat. But at least we've got one hell of a story to tell, and a bright future to look forward to, Jax added, his voice filled with the promise of new adventures. As they left the ring behind, Mira felt a sense of pride in what they'd accomplished. They'd faced the impossible and come out on top, a testament to the power of determination and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of hope. So, what's next? Anselm asked, his curiosity piqued. Whatever comes our way, Mira replied. But whatever it is, we'll face it together. To the future, Jax toasted, raising an imaginary glass. To the future, Mira and Anselm echoed, their voices filled with the promise of new adventures and the certainty that, whatever happened next, they'd be ready. In a universe that never stopped spinning, they'd learn to roll with the punches and keep their feet. Because sometimes, just surviving was the biggest victory of all. And with their victory came the realization that, despite everything, humanity had a place among the stars, a place they'd fought for and earned, one victory at a time. As they traveled back to Earth, Mira knew that this was just the beginning. They had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For now, anyway. Here's to the next adventure, she said, a smile playing on her lips. To adventure, Anselm and Jax echoed, their voices filled with the promise of whatever came next. In the vast expanse of space, they knew one thing for certain. They were ready for whatever the universe threw their way. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was rising to the occasion with a middle finger raised to the cosmos.